All right, people, we've been hinting at it. We've been talking Thrones for so long now that I don't know if we're going to be able to talk about anything else, but we have finally reached it. After 70, almost 70 episodes, we have reached it. The final 6 episodes of Game of Thrones. Season 8, the much controversial, often critically reviled final 6. It's hard to believe it's been only 3 years since these episodes have aired. It feels like it's been a lifetime. I was literally just watching a clip from Avengers Endgame, and I had to remind myself, I'm like, wow, that was only 3 years ago. It feels like it was a decade ago. Crazy enough to say the least. Pat, are you ready to dive in to the final season of Game of Thrones?
Hey, Dom, I think you and the rest of the Talkin TV family that's Talking Thrones with us here tonight will agree with me that this is about to become winter hell, and we're about to go through the 7 circles of hell to get there, right? We got all the dialogue, all the conversations, all the buddy stuff, in the next 2 episodes. This is our journey, our highway to winter hell.
Absolutely. All of that and more on today's episode of Talkin' Thrones. Well, Pat, we have finally reached it. We've been talking Thrones for roughly a year and a half now to this point, and it's so crazy because we talked about so much of the show, the highs, the lows, the good, the bad, the ugly, that it almost feels surreal that we've reached this point, and yet somehow we have. The often critically reviled, although not by all, as a few people have started to come out of the woodwork in the last couple of weeks as we're starting to build the House of the Dragon, which has yet to be released. I believe that it premieres roughly 2 weeks from when we're recording this. I know that goes into a little bit of conjunction with when this will be released, and obviously with the last week's episode, but we finally reached it. The premiere of season 8. This episode famously premiered a full 2 years after, or rather a year and a half after the finale of season 7, the previous episode that we just recapped, Dragon of the Wolf. Dragon of the Wolf aired in late August of 2017, and this episode premiered. They're back in the usual time slot, April of 2019. And there's a lot to break down about this season and this episode before we even get into it. But before we do, Pat, I wanted to get your general thoughts. I mean, so it had been longer than the usual 12 months. It had been I believe 18 months since the last episode of Game of Thrones. There's only going to be 6 episodes this season, so we know obviously that things are moving at a breakneck pace. And again, it's the final season. We clearly know there's going to be some big buildups, some gigantic confrontations, some massive battle sequences, the likes that the TV has never seen. Break down for me what your thought process was going into these last 6 episodes back in 2019 when they first aired.
Well, Dom, it's, I said this throughout the podcast that this became sort of like the Sunday night, dinner, invite all the friends, sit down, watch, enjoy a new episode of Game of Thrones, get transported as a group to a different world, enjoy it and have a conversation afterwards, a little coffee, etc. And, it's one of those things. By season 8, everybody in this friend group had disbanded. And we were basically all watching it on our own. A couple of conversations on the phone, or I would go over to one of the buddies' houses, but other people couldn't make it because they had work and stuff like that. So the commitment to showing up to these dinner parties every Sunday just kind of deteriorated. Life changes and all that stuff. But the fact is, no one was really rushing to come together and watch this season. I'm pretty sure everybody did fire up these episodes and wrapped up the show because, after 7 seasons, you might as well sit for the 8th.
Absolutely. It's kind of weird because, I mean, this season has become so critically reviled. It became this final season almost gained a new stance in the stance. It's okay, there's always that running kind of bad stigma, let's call it, amongst television shows in general. How the last season, it very rarely is able to stick the landing. Where I feel for the longest time, television itself was just kind of this average pastime that people watched, you know? And so the idea of it ending was never really talked about the way that it has been in recent years. But obviously, with the rise of peak prestige TV, with shows like The Sopranos, Lost, all of the above, and especially once Breaking Bad came in, where Breaking Bad was really the first show that seemed to tell an actual story spread out across several years, as opposed to a lot of the other shows that just like, oh, kind of, you know, the weekly hangout with your normal batch of people in a bar or in an apartment building or in an office setting or in a government setting, you know, as it was the average television structure for the longest time. But Game of Thrones, it was the fact that it was just this high fantasy show that had kind of grown from this little thing that just was so different than anything else at the time. It had become like this unstoppable juggernaut that it was yet again fell prey to kind of people's, I think, rather rightfully so, earned very high expectations for it, where you had a situation of a show that people were so eagerly anticipating for, were so interested, and for once it seemed like you had a television show, not a series of movies, a television show that had every person on the planet wondering, okay, how is this going to end? You know, and it's the case of every other TV show. They're like, how, not necessarily. I think there's a common misnomer where people think they know how it's going to end, and then television shows, or in this case movies, usually subvert that, and then it's usually up to the populace in order to decide whether that works for them or not. And this is one of the instances where it definitely didn't, but I feel like the consensus that's come from this last season in particular is that it kind of just gave up. At least that was the consensus at the time. What I'll say now is that, because I'll admit, it's very similar to last season. I binged the first 3 episodes of this season all together. I kind of like, it was really interesting watching them as like this kind of this one overall big first part of this kind of final 2-act part movie. And I will say that that instance of Benioff and Weiss kind of cheaping out and giving up, quote unquote, I don't necessarily know if that's all the case. This final season certainly has its fair share of flaws, like a lot of the other seasons that we've covered in the last couple of months with these last 4 seasons, obviously since kind of season 4 and they deviated from the books. But by no means is it a bad season of television. I can definitively say that.
Yeah, you know, I don't think everybody on the planet was watching this show at the time.
I disagree. I very much disagree.
Listen, with the amount of billions of people on the planet, there's some that are definitely not watching. You know, it was definitely very popular in terms of the TV watching audience. I'll say that. You know, so there was a lot of you know, conversation about it. But the main thing is, you know, the first 3 episodes, like you said, like, you know, last season, season 7, when I went through the series a second time, I kind of binged through season 7 really quickly. And, you know, when I got to season 8, the first 3 episodes were really easy to just watch one right after the other. And, you know, that's no different from, you know, what we're doing here now with the show. You said that you kind of rushed through all 3 episodes. Yep. I kind of did the same thing last night preparing for this particular conversation. And I'm telling you, like, it's just you know, it draws you in. It's like you're at Winterfell. All this stuff's happening. They're all preparing for the Night King. A lot of other kind of storylines are being fleshed out. There is a lot that happens in these 3 episodes. And I will say that it's enjoyable. It's the first half of season 8. You know, is solid. I think it comes down to the second half, which we'll get to as we go through the episodes. But I think, you know, there's a lot of characters and a lot of plot lines like still that have to be wrapped up. And again, in 3 episodes, wrapping up a lot of those storylines feels forced. So I think it's one of those things where, you know, first half of the season building up to the battle with the Night King, are really fantastic. And that's really the climax of the show. Everybody wants to know, like, you know, what's going to happen with the Night King. And to be honest, I expected this whole thing to happen at the end of the series. Like episode 6 was going to be Night King gone, a little wrap up, like everyone's dancing with the Ewoks and everything's great. 10 minutes later, credits, the show's over. You know, I know I'm crossing over in my Star Wars and you know, Game of Thrones.
Not the first other pop culture reference that we've brought onto this show.
Yeah, the Children of the Forest, not the Ewoks, but you know, you could see my confusion. But the main thing is, you know, they switched it around. They basically said, no, Night King first.
Right.
And
that's where I feel like, again, a lot of other criticism for this final season came in, is people were so expecting that the Night King and the threat from the Army of the Dead were going to trump and be the ultimate end-all be-all threat, because that's what had been set up since literally minute one of the show, where you have the opening scene of this show is the three Night's Watch Rangers getting killed by this threat beyond the wall, and you have this existential threat that is constantly looming over this entire show while all these other, like, in order to kind of express the base meaninglessness of all of this constant political squabbling, because no matter what happens, death comes for all. And so that's what I feel like made Benioff and Weiss' decision to ultimately have the threat from the Night King happen in the first half of the show, rather than be the overall looming threat, questionable to say the least.
Yeah, I don't know. I'm just going to say that, I haven't watched the second 3 episodes in a while. Actually, the second time that I watched through the series, I literally watched the 3rd episode, The Night King dies, and then I just stopped watching. I didn't even bother watching the last 3 episodes. So, it's going to be very interesting in the weeks ahead for me to revisit those episodes, because I literally have not watched them since the first airing of those. So I'm not sure how I feel. I'm just going off of what it's been for a few years since I've seen them. And my feeling was that once the Night King is sort of gone, it just takes the wind out of the sails.
Right.
And,
it sucks, because it's like because, again, like that conflict with Cersei and Daenerys that was driving so much of season 7 was so interesting and so engaging at the time. And then you have the threat from the Night King that kind of shifts focus, and you're like, okay, that's cool. And the interest going into season 8 is like, okay, you still obviously have the fight for the throne and against Cersei that's going to come, but now, like, it seems that the Night King has taken center stage. So the assumption is that that's what's going to drive the tension for this whole last season, and that's why you're like, okay, that's why they're going to do 6 more episodes. So the fact that they deal with the Night King so quickly, or at least how it seems so quickly, because they wrap up the whole tension, similar to Beyond the Wall last season, in one episode, that you're like, okay, well, this almost makes the rest of the struggles kind of pointless, no?
Yeah, it's listen, I think it's the expectation of the Night King being the big bad and the sort of final point that has to be taken care of. I feel like that's the expectation that was set. And, maybe it doesn't really have to be that. Maybe it's fine that the Night King gets taken care of halfway through the series. But where's the implication of, like, now that they've taken care of this, like, magic creature and all this stuff, where does that come into play? Like, how does that impact Daenerys and Cersei, right, and all that stuff? And again, like I said, I have to watch those final 3 episodes to really formulate how I think about the second half of this season. But for all intents and purposes, I will say that the first half of season 8 is stellar. It is fantastic. It's everything I kind of want from the show. And so, right now, I think the show is firing in all cylinders, and we're going to have to, when we get there, see what happened in the second half of the season.
I agree 100%. I think that what happened was, and I haven't done this in a while, but if I had to do a little bit of speculation, I think that what happened was that Benioff and Weiss, when going into this final season, were kind of interested in the sense of where, we kind of set up, whether they realized it or not, that Daenerys was kind of going to go nuts. We've been hinting at that, like, how everyone, Tyrion, Varys, no one wants her to use the dragons on King's Landing. And they're like, so their whole thing, so they kind of like, were when they were plotting out season 8 and everything, and kind of how they were focusing on it. I have a feeling they always knew that we're going to have, like, these 2 major action set piece episodes. They famously did not have Miguel Sapochnik, famously their action set piece director of seasons 5 and 6, direct any episodes for season 7, because they were saving him, because he delivered the 2 biggest battle sequence episodes of the entire show this season, with obviously his direction of The Long Night and the Bells. And I think that what they decided was, they ultimately figured that it would be more interesting to explore Daenerys' fall from grace rather than pursue the Night King as the final big bad. They ultimately decided to shift focus from the Night King to Daenerys as the final big bad, and that's the direction that they chose to take. And as far as how that played out within the final consensus of the show versus execution versus audience reception and all that, I mean, the rest seemingly tells as far as what people would have preferred versus what would have been better for the story. But, I mean, who knows? We're going to break it down and figure it out. But like you said, this first half of the show, for our money at least, is stellar. You're right. The way that kind of each of these first 3 episodes acts as like its own individual structure as far as setting itself up. This episode, Winterfell, we get all the characters back in it. Also, famously, a couple of other stats that I wanted to point out is that, with the exception of a few miscellaneous shots in the last couple of episodes, we are only down to 2 major locations in this entire last season: Winterfell and King's Landing. We got obviously brief snapshots of Dragonstone, Last Hearth in this episode, the West once we see Arya set sail, couple other plays, but for the most part, a majority of the action for these last 6 episodes takes place primarily in Winterfell and King's Landing. This is also the only season of the show since the first episode of the entire show where the bulk of the episodes take place primarily in one location, because following this episode, we have episodes 2, 3, and 5. 3 episodes that all pretty much take place within one geographical location. Episodes 2 and 3 in Night of the Seven Kingdoms and The Long Night all take place entirely in Winterfell. And then episode 5, The Bells, takes place, obviously, you know, they start off on Dragonstone, but primarily in King's Landing. So that also focus. Also, that what happened this season is the famous opening credit sequence, which has primarily been the same for the last couple of seasons, has a drastic redo for this last couple. I don't really know how to describe it, but they kind of change it to have almost like more of like an artificial edge to it, you know, where we kind of are exploring the inner workings of Winterfell and King's Landing as they're kind of rising from the from the artificial CG map that they've kind of created. But let's get into it. This episode is entitled Winterfell. It's directed by David Nutter, who directed several other episodes throughout the entirety of the show. It's written by Dave Hill, who came on in season 5 and wrote 1 episode for the last couple of seasons. He wrote Sons of the Harpy for season 5, the episode where Sir Barristan died. He wrote Home for season 6, the 2nd episode, and he wrote Eastwatch of last season. He writes this episode, and Benioff and Weiss are very clearly structuring this, again, like a finale. Again, they are attempting to pay homage to kind of where they came from. This entire opening sequence where you're kind of following this tracking shot of this one little kid as he kind of comes out into this crowd. You see Arya, and it's clear that like all the Northerners have come out in order to witness this massive foreign army marching. You see streams of Unsullied. You see all the characters marching up on their horses. It's these beautiful vista shots before the dragons fly overhead. You're seeing all the characters emerge back in. Tyrion and Varys are cracking jokes.
I like the fact that you bring up the kid as the point of view character that kind of brings us into it. Like he's crawling all over the rock. It's sort of like, you know, hey, that used to be Bran. You know what I mean? That's sort of it's bringing you back to the first episode of the show. And this is going to be a retelling of like where all the characters are at this point, because you got to set the stage of like Night King's coming. Here's all these characters coming together. They're going to interface, you know, for the first time. You know, I thought this was a fantastic sequence. Oh, and one of my things just went off. So I think the greatest thing about this sequence is just, you know, everyone really being who they are, you know, and like Arya's waiting in the crowd, you know, away from everybody else. She's kind of hidden amongst the common people. You know, you have the Hound, you have like Missandei and Grey Worm and everybody coming in like triumphantly, like they're the big army that they are. And the one thing I will say is that, you know, if you remember all the sequences of King's Landing where someone is kind of being marched in, or, you know, be marched around, or, you know, even Cersei's like shame walk, everybody is despicable and throwing vegetables and really just like, you know, the squalor of, of mankind.
The show has never portrayed the common folk in a very positive light.
But here in Winterfell, everyone is sort of respectful. And yes, this is kind of a foreign army that's coming into Winterfell. Clearly they're looking at them with skepticism, and they don't really trust the outsiders. But they're not sitting there, you know, afraid of who's coming in their city and picking up some rotten cabbage and throwing it at them. They're kind of maintaining a level of civility, even if they are wary of who these people are.
Right, exactly. And in order to kind of counter, again, there's a lot of like interest. There's a lot of like kind of random gestures here, comments here and there. Jon tells Daenerys, he's like, I told you Northerners are are very skeptical of foreigners because I don't remember. I don't think before like Robert's army came north several years ago. I mean, that was the Lannisters, but it's like it's been several hundred years since the Northerners have had a foreign army march this far north, let alone, regardless of what side they're on. You see Missandei and Grey Worm exchange glances as well, where they're like, yeah, the Northerners are being respectful. They understand to some extent that this army is here to fight for them, but it's like they've never seen Unsullied before. They've never seen Dothraki before. They've heard stories of them, but again, it's not like the 21st century where you can just look something up on social media and get an instant video of it. It's like you hear about these things, and if you're not exposed to it in your regular everyday life, like it may as well be like not existent, like a fairy tale almost. So the fact that you have like this massive army of Unsullied and Dothraki, two fully grown dragons flying overhead, it's literally like kind of mixing the fantasy with the real life. It's massive how they do it.
Yeah, when those dragons fly overhead, the smile on Daenerys's face, like,
it's awesome.
Yeah, I'm bringing these dragons to the north.
Yeah.
Look at me. It's like, she definitely is wallowing in the fact that she is this powerful queen that's entering such an established place as Winterfell. So, I think, she's not just like totally innocent in terms of her role. She understands that what the implication is that she is someone of interest, that, and she knows she's going to have to earn the respect of the people. But I think having these two powerful dragons, makes her think, that the people least, be willing to be amenable to her as an ally rather than an enemy.
100%, and it leads to the courtyard in Winterfell. Again, it's shot almost identically to when Robert first came into Winterfell in the first episode, where you have Daenerys and Jon walking with their allies. Sansa has everyone out there waiting for them. Jon is reunited with Bran for the first time since the second episode. Like I said, it's all the characters coming back together. Jon introduces Daenerys to Sansa, and you can tell it's like, oh yeah, this is already going to be a relationship that does not necessarily go best, but Sansa at the very least understands it's like they're here to fight for us. At the very least, she still trusts Jon, so she kind of does the Winterfell is yours or grace with much ire in her voice.
Oh man, I'm telling you, the whole like Jon rushing up to Bran and being like, "Oh my god,"
and then he's the latest one to see Bran in his robot mode.
Yeah, he's like, "What's up, Jon?" No, it's one of those things where
he's like, "You're a man now," and he's like, "Almost," and it's like,
what? Man, it's. I think Bran, for these 3 episodes, besides the fact that he's sitting in a chair by a tree,
right,
for that whole battle, I think he's firing on all cylinders. Pretty much being the 3-eyed raven, everything that kind of is speckled in there between this episode and next episode, really does work. I wish there was a little more to, his role in the big battle. But ultimately, we'll get to that when we get to it. But I think a lot of the things that he says and a lot of the confrontations that he has over this episode and the next episode, really hit home for me.
Absolutely. Yeah. Well, like I said, we have a lot to get to. And clearly this episode is wasting no time because they're not back in Winterfell for 5 minutes before Bran immediately is like, we don't have time for this. The dead have broken through the wall and he has your dragon. Like, there is no, they are immediately off to the races. They're like, yeah, we got to get shit rolling. So they get to the courtroom scene, and obviously all the Northerners are, as per usual, extremely skeptical. They're not happy. They're like, wait, Jon, so you left, you were a king, you came back. We don't even know what you are now. And Jon kind of breaks it down for them. He's like, look, it's like I had a choice to make. It's like I have either kept my crown or I could have protected the North, and I chose the North, again, trying to emphasize the decision. And then naturally, of course, Tyrion has to jump up because I'm just convinced that Tyrion at this point just has to insert himself into every confrontation because it's almost like he's got this self-awareness. He's like, yeah, I know, even though Jon and Daenerys are the main characters, we all know I'm the most important character. I'm the one that helped make this alliance happen. But again, he's like,
I don't know if I read this particular scene that way. Like,
well, not that way. I'm just saying, like, more of like a meta self-referential thing.
Yeah, it's one of those things where, Jon says his piece and the response is lukewarm at best. And
Yes.
Tyrion knows that a pause in conversation is very bad. So,
Yes.
He does think, smugly that he is the best person to break that silence, but he quickly walks into a trap when,
especially once he reveals that the Lannister armies are also supposedly coming north to reinforce them, which we all that just makes the Northerners even more pissed off because they're like, great,
yeah,
as if all of these foreigners come in and it wasn't bad enough. Now we got to deal with the Lannisters, an army for fighting for a family that has openly screwed us over more times than we can count. That has resulted directly, single-handedly, in more deaths of people close to us than we can count. So that doesn't help one bit.
Well, I guess he successfully, segues the conversation away from Jon and what he did wrong, and basically puts the anger on the Lannisters. So there it could be an argument said that his diplomacy in this situation is to basically be a little self-deprecating and be like, hey, look at the Lannister family and their role in this.
Whether that's
because
his
that's
intention
going
or
to
not,
distract the rest of the group.
It does work for sure. But again, Sansa's immediately like, okay, well, I wasn't planning for this many, for this much many soldiers. She's like, we have to feed on Sully and Dothraki. And now Lannisters is like, what about dragons? She's like, what do dragons eat? Again, it's like trying to build up more of the ire between Sansa and Daenerys. Again, they don't have that much time and they don't have that many episodes to build it up. But I still do think they do a pretty good job of showing it's like, yes, Jon may have fallen for whatever charms of Daenerys, whatever back and forth charms. We'll talk about that more in the next episode. But it's like, Sansa's not having any of it. She's like, I am for the North and the North alone. And I don't care who you are, anybody that stands even a little bit against the North is a threat,
I think the wit between Daenerys and Sansa is great in these episodes.
Yes.
It's like, what do dragons eat anyway? It's like whatever they want. It's like a very poignant, choice of words. And the weird thing is that, almost immediately after this scene, someone comes in and is like, 8 goats, my lady. And it's like, and Jon's like, what's wrong? And the dragons are barely eating. It's kind of comical, how they bring the dragons into this episode.
Right.
Whatever. It's how
I
they
wanted to
use
ask you
it
about that
in
because, like I
these
said, we
episodes.
have the rest of the sequences that happen at Winterfell. It's mostly just kind of like a series of one-off scenes until we get to like the ending sequence, which like very heavily sets up for the next episode and also the rest of the season. But so the scene with the dragons, like, what's your take on that? Because like one could argue that it's kind of a waste of time. It's like, oh, they're flying around on dragons. It does have a purpose because it sets up that Jon is going to be riding Rhaegal in the battle against the Night King, and the scene for setup is pretty cool. But obviously, again, I'll watch
all, does it happen this episode, or am I confusing the
No,
next
that's this episode.
That
is
it
this
is
episode.
okay.
They both ride the dragon.
I feel like again, like these 3 episodes are so good to watch
they
back
blend
to back.
so seamlessly together. I forget what happens in each episode.
Exactly.
Don't worry, I got you there.
Okay, cool. But yeah, it's it does exactly what you said. Like it sets up him riding the dragon.
Yes.
It furthers sort of their romantic entanglement.
Yes. Some great lines too. It's like I've never ridden a dragon. It's like what happens if I fall off? And she's like, then I will have enjoyed your company. And it's like, what exactly do I grab onto? Whatever you can. And then afterwards, when they've landed, it's like, well, you've officially ruined horses for me. Some great lines in there.
Well, yeah. Well, also like they're at the waterfall, and it's like, hey, we could stay here for 1,000 years.
But and John's like, I remember the last girl that said that to me, and it didn't end
like,
well for her.
Well, he's like, we'd be very old. Like he's just kind of like puts the pin in the balloon and deflates that one. But the fact is, the 2 of them are kind of, going off on their merry way and going deeper and deeper into couplehood.
Yes.
And I think that's a nice little setup because there's going to be a little scheme,
some revelations as well
between Bran and Sam that have to take
place.
Not
to mention more very obvious hints from the dragons, because as I was talking about last season, the only reason why Jon was even able to pet that dragon, why it didn't bite his whole arm off, was because the dragon could smell the Targaryen blood in him. And it's funny because I was actually having this conversation with my housemate a couple weeks ago about the reason why the dragons are staring them is not just another comedic Beavis and Butthead moment from D&D, but apparently it's because the dragons throughout the history of the Targaryens, and I don't know if they'll explore this more in House of the Dragon or not, but supposedly one of the reasons why kind of the dragons became weaker and weaker over time is because the dragons could sense the various incest between the Targaryens and were apparently not a fan of it. So the fact that the dragons can sense it's like, oh, these 2 are related, but they're they're doing the same shit as like previous ones. I don't know. It's more of like a fan reference here and there, but it's like, I don't know. There's something funny to the fact that the dragons kind of being self-aware of. It's like, yeah, this incest stuff has got to stop between this family, because that's what kind of, in a way, led to the downfall of the Targaryens.
Story-wise, that stuff is all like muddied,
Yeah, to say the least.
It's brought up, as sort of the history of the Targaryens. Here it's sort of, they don't really know, right?
Right.
They're just two people that met randomly and they kind of fell in love.
But it is the fact that, again, it's something about the Targaryens' blood that the dragons are able to smell, and such as what allows the Targaryens to ride them, obviously, from their descent in Valyria. And so it's the fact that they do smell the Targaryen blood in Jon that is the only reason why he's able to ride Rhaegal, let alone get close to the dragons without, getting his arm chopped off.
Yeah, I don't know. It's interesting. Like Game of Thrones, the show, the way it handles it is kind of like the two of them are just, they're together. It happens. They don't really address it. It's not like a Star Wars situation where, Luke and Leia are like, yeah, we're siblings, bro, and that's the end of it. It never really goes bring it up again. A romance.
Well, because that doesn't have implications towards not only obviously some, weird familial things, but also the implications of the political lineage of who gets the throne,
Yeah. I think the weirdest part about this season is the fact that the two of them are seemingly going to get married anyway.
Right. And to the point where it's even brought up by Tyrion, Varys, and Davos in this episode when they see riding
exactly.
together,
Because, what is it? Daenerys is really upset at Tyrion. It's like, I can't believe you're still wearing that pin. Maybe I should give it to the other two.
Well, not yet. That doesn't happen until next
No.
That doesn't happen until next
episode.
episode. Yeah, that's when Jaime comes up and tells them, tells them about the Lannister army.
So basically, they're watching over the balcony, and
right. Their whole thing is they bring it up as a suggestion in order to potentially further an alliance, because they obviously know that once this battle with the dead is over, again, assuming that they'll survive it, that Daenerys is going to turn her sights south, and she's going to want all the Seven Kingdoms. And she's like, okay, we know that the North is going to put up a big struggle to that. So if we can get this marriage happening, then we, again, look into the future, okay, we might be able to prevent something of that, and it helps that they're already kind of head over heels for each other. So,
yeah, ultimately, it doesn't make quite much sense that this is a point of contention for her because, if they do get married and they do kind of reign over the kingdom, they're going to pick an heir and, it's going to be passed down.
Right.
So what difference does it make if he's technically the rightful heir?
Right. And that's what was always confusing to me as far as who had the better claim. It didn't really make sense because they were always, because again, the track record was they were always going to get married. So is it the fact that they're related? Is that what kind of ruins it? Because if they were gonna, as far as if they were gonna get married anyways, because it's like, okay, if they were gonna get married, then they would technically be ruling as equals. Wouldn't that be a better alternative than just one trying to vie for power over the other? I don't know. Maybe that just might be me trying to grasp onto Westerosi politics and gender ideology and whatnot. But
yeah, well, the question becomes would they even reveal who Jon really is to anybody, or it would just be a secret between the two of them for the sake of keeping the kingdoms together?
Right, but again, that comes the bigger that I understand, because at the very least the problem there is the fact that it's the fact that it's not just the two of them that know about it. It is the fact that Bran, the fact that Bran and Sam already know about it, and they're the ones who told Jon as a result. And Daenerys knows it's okay, if there are other people that know about this other than us, that becomes an issue, because it's Westeros. This shit spreads like wildfire, pun intended.
Oh yeah, well maybe Bran will.
So that part I at the very least understood, because she knew in her heart of hearts in some capacity that Jon was going to tell Sansa and Arya because he trusts them. And then they were going to cause it to spread, because once Tyrion knows, it's over,
Yeah. I think it's one of those things where, I guess we'll have to see how it plays out the rest of the season.
Right.
I don't think anyone really has a reason to spread it out.
Right.
Unless Daenerys proves herself to be untrustworthy.
Right. Well, it ultimately comes down to Sansa and the fact that she does not trust anybody, and the fact that even though Daenerys brought again an entire army and 2 dragons north to Winterfell to help them fight off the dead. The fact that Sansa still does not trust that she is not going to turn those dragons and armies right back on Winterfell when it comes time to lay claim to the 7 kingdoms, and the fact that and it is that kind of inherent knowledge that causes her to spread that information, knowing that it could destabilize Daenerys' reign. That's something that Daenerys even points out later on in the season. And in fact, I feel that even is started off with her reunion with Tyrion here, where Tyrion tells her, like, yes, I fully believe that Cersei is going to send the armies north. And she even straight up tells us, like, I'm sorry, but the fact that she convinced you of that means that you're either way stupider than I thought, or you clearly don't know your sister that well. Because Sansa is able to guess what we as the audience are able to guess, that Cersei was able to fool and hoodwink Tyrion with last season's finale, that Cersei never had any intention of sending her armies north at all, you know?
Yeah, it's one of those weird things, like, you know, Tyrion should have been very skeptical to begin with, where it's like, he should have just been like, Cersei says she's going to bring the troops. We'll see if that happens.
Right. It was the fact that Tyrion was so willing and able to believe Cersei is what kind of doesn't really validate his claim as a character, because again, Tyrion is supposed to be logistically the most intelligent character on the show, and intelligent characters are typically skeptical of everything. There should have always been some level of doubt in his mind as far as whether Cersei was going to. But again, that also goes into the thing that we were talking about in last episode, as far as whether Cersei was blatantly manipulating Tyrion during that entire discussion, using the pregnancy as a weapon in order to fool him, you know, and he clearly bought it hook, line, and sinker.
Yeah, that's what is set up here. That's what plays out. So I guess we have really no reason to question it. It's one of those things where it kind of feels like Lord Baelish syndrome. Like all of a sudden you kind of drop a couple IQ points and just for plot convenience.
Yeah, and now the little finger's out of the way. It's like, oh man, Tyrion said it right there in order to get that next.
Yeah, so it's one of those things where I guess we're just gonna have to live with it. So.
Yeah, then you have Sansa angrily confronting Jon, just being like, yep, the Umbers, they've gone home. You know, they won't bow to a queen.
Oh, God.
And Jon brings up the line, is like, yeah, it's like, I believe I will swear my allegiance to you until the end of my days. It's like, yeah, calling out more of the blatant hypocrisy of the Northerners. It's like, I guess all of that honor and loyalty, that really is all just bullshit until it's for, for convenience sake.
What was the name of that young Umber, Oliver Twist? You know, he's like, please.
Ned Umber. Oh well. Sorry,
could I help some more?
Well, it's the So it's the Glovers. It's the Glovers that Sorry, it was the Glovers that revoked their allegiance to the Starks, that went home. You know, Robert Glover. You know, the old man who originally turned them down when they were getting allies to take. Yeah,
but isn't the young kid in the court?
So Ned Umber was sent to Last Hearth in order to get the rest of his.
I got you.
Back to Winterfell. And because Last Hearth was closest to Eastwatch, and then that's where they unfortunately, they're like, yeah, he was not making it back, you know.
Oh man, you know
that leads to a great jump scare at the end. But
yeah, talk about just one of the greatest scenes of the undead is when
that was it was cool to say the least. It was kind of just a brief insert there in order to, like, okay, we need to like give these guys something to do. You know, Tormund, Beric, they reunite with Dolores, Ed, and the rest of what's left of the Night's Watch 100%. At Last Hearth, and they're like, oh, they just happened to get there after the Night King had already there, and Ed has horses, so they're like, okay, if we could ride hard, we'll be able to circle around the dead and make it back to Winterfell, because they know, they're like, yeah, if we don't make it back to Winterfell now, we're screwed, you know. But it's a great jump scare. It's a great quick scene where they just come in. That Umber's stabbed in like that weird symbol that has become synonymous with the
with arms and blood,
all made of arms. It's great, and then he wakes up and he starts screaming. Oh, it's so good.
Yeah, so when he wakes up, you know, the zombie Umber, that screech is just horrifying.
Yes.
And then the fact that they just like immediately light him on fire, and and the whole symbol lights up.
Not even a hesitation. None of that shit is like, oh, it's a kid. None of that shit from season 5. They're like, nah, this motherfucker's undead. Taking him out.
Oh, geez, you know, full expletive there, Dom.
Yep.
But,
hey, man,
listen,
it's a living dead, man.
I think, you know, this is like Sam Raimi level jump scare,
yes.
You know, and it works. It really does kind of set the tone at the end of this episode for what's ahead. You know, it kind of says to you, like, the Night King took his time to send this message, and it's of blood, it's of death. This is what awaits everybody in Winterfell. And the fact is, like, he's fast approaching. The Tormund and the gang have to kind of do double pace and ride around the army of the dead. So they have to risk their lives to get to Winterfell. And the fact is, once they get there, the Night King is not too far behind.
Right,
so,
exactly. They even said when they get there in the next episode, they're like, "Yeah, how long before he gets there?" It's like before the sun comes up tomorrow. So it's like, we don't have long.
Here's one short scene that literally just kind of lets you know as a viewer that time is precious. And I think the fact that you have an entire hour here of them, the characters kind of like working out and coming together and just working out their issues and whatnot. The next episode, you have an entire episode where they kind of, continue seeing where they stand with each other and integrating, but then they have time to wait, right? So the first episode is sort of them getting to know each other and making their arguments and trying to figure out like how they're going to work together. The second episode is almost like, now we wait.
Yes.
And it's like, what are these characters that have lingering issues that they clearly have to deal with? Once the Night King is taken care of, what do they do when they're stuck in a castle alone at night before the Night King shows up?
Right.
And I think that deliberate, like, hey, episode 1, it's all about them sort of getting to know each other. Episode 2, it's like they're forced to wait with each other. So that deliberate nature of just giving 2 long episodes of them waiting for the shoe to drop, so to speak, with the Night King battle is great and well paced. And this scene with Zombie Umber basically tells you that like the threat is imminent.
Yes.
And it's like it could happen at any moment. And the sense of dread in the next episode 2 of season 8, is just like,
it's really well established, and I think that's another reason
they really
why,
have to wait. The Night King is taking his time.
Yeah,
even though he's
really
right
making them sweat there. Yeah, and I think that's another reason why of these first 2 episodes, a lot of people are more favorable towards episode 2, Night of the Seven Kingdoms, than episode 1, Winterfell. But like I said, I've made this clear from day one. I love character get-togethers. I love character introductions. I love all that stuff. That's why I'm a little bit more favorable towards this episode. Although I will say, in the more and more I watch episode 2, that definitely like definitive build-up sense of dread that is established in the next episode, I think is very, very well done. So now we have 2 major other sequences, because again, as much important stuff happens in Winterfell in this episode, we do still get a little bit of King's Landing here. So I say we cut to King's Landing, get all that stuff out of the way, and then we'll come back and handle like the end of the episode with the whole Bran and Sam reveal, and then Jaime's arrival in Winterfell. So we cut to King's Landing. Like I said, it's very, very brief. King's Landing itself, they're really saving that for the second half of the episode. Cersei Lannister as a character, that was another criticism that was delivered towards the season, that with the exception of episode 5, The Bells, Cersei Lannister as a character does really not have that much to do last season, which I guess was a little bit underwhelming for a decent amount of people, considering just how much of a stance and really how much damage she ended up doing to Daenerys, despite the fact that she really had relatively little allies and resources on her side, aside from Euron Greyjoy. But it starts off, Qyburn informs her the dead have broken through the wall. She's still kind of in that mindset of, okay, I'm in this city, I'm protected, the Northern fools are going to deal with the dead. She's watching as Euron approaches with, he's ferrying across the Golden Company, this mercenary fleet that they paid for with the Tyrell gold. Euron still has Yara as his prisoner. There's this one, it still makes me chuckle, where it's like, oh, that snow that was falling on King's Landing last season. Yeah, it's not happening. King's Landing is still just as bright and sunny and cheery as it was in all the previous 7 seasons. It leads to the meme moment where she's meeting with Captain Harry Strickland is his name, portrayed by Danish actor Mark Risman, in the now empty Great Hall. I'm like, wow, so nobody is there supporting her now, and her whole thing, her whole stance, it leads to the many, many memes that were made of it. She's like, man, I really wanted those elephants that the Golden Company were famous for. And she's like, well, they're not exactly situated to, long sea travels. And again, the Golden Company it's in their name, all about their gold. And really the only thing that comes from this sequence, it's 2 things, obviously. It's Theon rescuing Yara, which is kind of set up for where, Yara, in order to give Yara something to do, it's like, okay, so the Iron Islands, remember how awesome they were last season? Yeah, they're not really important anymore, because Yara's
I'm going to say that I like Euron's role in this episode.
Yes.
Is, he has
Euron's
Yara
role in this episode, fantastic.
Yeah, so he has Yara, and he's like, she's like, why are you keeping me alive? Because you're the only one I can talk to. The rest of these guys are kind of dumb, and he's
I think he said also most of them are mute too.
Yeah, exactly. They're unwilling to speak up to him because he rules through fear. So I think one of the things is it's interesting, like the way he's tormenting Yara. But then, his plan is basically that he just wants to, marry Cersei and, be the king, even though he's sort of, not going to be the ruler. He's just going to be the man behind the queen. And that's his goal. So he goes into the courtroom and makes his argument that he's delivered, signed, sealed, delivered everything he's promised, and that wars take years, and that, Cersei should really reward, what he has done for her. And, at first she's definitely like, no, you're going to wait 7 years until this is done.
Right.
But then she kind of realizes that she needs allies, and
she realizes, and now that Jaime's gone, she's like, oh, I really don't have anybody else. It's like there's only so much. She's like, the mountain is pretty unstoppable, but there's only so much he can do. She's like, she's like, all my power now resides in this Iron Fleet, and I need to do whatever I can in order to. And it's kind of tragic when you think about it, where she's literally, her whole entire character arc has been about trying to get past Robert Baratheon and how trapped and helpless she felt while with him. And now in so many other actions, she's kind of unfortunately found herself back in the same position where she's like, yeah, I need to rely on these old-fashioned, kind of feminine tricks in order to keep Euron and keep the Iron Fleet, which has essentially become my only source of power,
Yeah, it's I think she's in a better position where she knows how to, command the situation in her favor. But Euron's one of those guys that he's has his own game plan, and if she's not careful, she's going to fall into the Robert Baratheon kind of under his thumb type of thing. I don't think at this point she would do that. I think she would totally take him out, have the mountain kind of come and just
for sure
take care of business.
For sure. But again, then what does that do for the Iron Fleet?
Yeah, she definitely has the total upper hand. But it's I don't know if they explore it really for the rest of the season.
Right, because again, because the problem with that comes from that is that we then sit out 2 episodes with no Cersei Lannister or King's Landing at all, and by the time it comes in, she performs one really, really stupid, needlessly violent action that almost ensures her downfall and ensures that Daenerys is going to invade the city. It's like, if you wanted to almost have a surefire reason is to make sure that dragon roasts the city to the ground, kidnap one of her most precious advisors and prized friends and kill her in front of her. God damn.
So we'll get to that when we get to it. But I think the fact of the matter is, the Iron Isles still has a little bit of gumption left. Theon finally saves Yara.
Yes.
When he unties her, she just headbutts him.
Right.
And then offers her hand. Finally, he's gotten over his trauma, and she kind of forgives him to a certain degree after getting one headbutt in. And then they gotta go. Yeah. And the storyline ends with, Yara being like, Euron's doing this whole thing and we could take back the Iron Isles.
Right.
And that's really what we should do from a leadership position. And Theon agrees. He thinks that they should take the Iron Isles. But there is a decision, the decision that he should have made way back in season 2, when he should have, stayed loyal to the Starks instead of trying to,
be something that he wasn't.
Yeah, please his father. He basically says, "I got to go to Winterfell. I owe it to them."
Right. He's he's like, I got to fight with my other family.
Yeah, and Yara understands and literally lets him go to do what he was meant to do.
Right, and it's a little bit bittersweet, that ending too, especially knowing what happens to Theon once the long night comes.
Yeah, so I think this is really kind of like the end of the Iron Isle storyline.
Right.
Obviously, kind of Yara goes and does her thing. I believe she makes a cameo, probably, right?
In the finale. And her whole thing is, she's like, I'll take the Iron Islands because at the very least, and if Winterfell falls, Daenerys will have some place to fall back to.
Exactly. And then, Theon He basically is a participant in the Long Night, and then Euron is in the
The
war.
bells. Yeah.
The war is ahead.
Yeah.
So I think
we'll get to that when we get to that.
Yeah, so it's like, I think the Iron Isles in season 7 really had a huge uptick. And in season 8, it's kind of the natural progression of that storyline. They don't play as huge of a role, I don't think. Maybe Euron does to a certain degree. Like Theon kind of just hangs out with Bran in the courtyard. So he has like one, maybe two viable scenes towards the end of the Long Night. So I would say, like, it's cool that this is sort of that almost the resolution moment of their storylines, Yara and Theon, because obviously they go their separate ways, and this is sort of the end of the Iron Isles. They kind of are on the downswing, for the rest of the episode when everyone else is still going towards these major climaxes.
Right, and we also have a quick check-in with Bran where, essentially, I mean, there's a lot more that we can talk about with this scene, but really, it's just the fact that it's like, Qyburn basically comes in and is like, Cersei basically is like, we know that you've been screwed over by both Lannister brothers, so here's Joffrey's crossbow, here, go north, and on the off chance that Jaime and Tyrion survive, you can go ahead and kill them. And Bran's almost just like, okay, I'm obviously, I know I have to accept this because the alternative is Cersei's going to have me killed. But he's at this point, Bran's literally like, is there no extent to which I'm not going to get screwed over by the Lannisters in some extent? But obviously, again, like I said, I've already talked enough about how wasted Bran has been by the storyline of the show. He's always just there for a quick fun laugh. So let's cut back to Winterfell. Let's wrap it up. So again, the beginning of the Daenerys' end comes from when Jorah in an attempt to try and attempt to try and do some goodwill, introduces Daenerys to obviously to Sam, who is the person who cured him.
How does it come up again?
It's meant to
this is Sam Tarly, and she's like, oh, I'm sorry. Like, did you just say Tarly?
Well, no. So it's meant to be this nicely where, again, she just introduces him as Sam, right? He doesn't. I don't even think that Jorah knows. Who that really Jorah has not put the dots together, obviously, of the Tarleys at all. And so he introduces Daenerys, obviously, again, he has this fondness for Daenerys. Daenerys obviously wants to meet the man who saved her most trusted advisor and oldest and closest friend. They meet up. They think it's going to go similar. He wants a pardon for stealing, Heartsbane and for stealing several books from the Citadel. She's like, she doesn't at all think that that's of any importance or relevance. So she's like, I think that an exception can be made. And then it comes up. He mentions his family name is Tarly. And then she's like,
it's because of the sword.
Randall Tarly. It's because of the sword.
It's because of the sword. And the fact is, it's like,
well, funny you should mention that.
Your father refused to bend the knee, so he's dead. I burned him alive, like KFC. He's fried at this point.
Oh, man.
And then the best part is Sam, just with his innocence. He's just like, well, that's cool. So
that's cool.
Dickon's the Lord, so I'll just go back home.
Like, oh man,
and it's like
it's so perfect in its conception because it's a scene that's not funny at all. It's actually
it's set up as
because it's just the kind of the comedy of errors as far as it's like, these things have happened like across miles upon miles of land, and so with no communication. Like Sam was not informed about this, rather willingly so by the Maester, so Sam has no knowledge of this, and so it plays out almost like a reverse slapstick comedy of errors.
Exactly. I think it's written that way, but it's in a serious tone.
Yes.
And I think it works so well because it's like, Sam's innocence of just like, well, Dickon's now going to be the Lord.
Right.
Everything's going to be great. I don't need that pardon. And then she's just like, no.
Yeah, that.
Yeah, he decided to burn with your father.
Yeah.
It's like,
and it's like we tried to not get him to, but he
Sam's just like, well, thank you for your time.
And so naturally, Sam pissed off.
He doesn't know what to say.
Well, no, because what he does do is he tries to take his anger out on Bran because he knows that Bran can see everything because he's aware of Bran's powers. So he wants to be pissed off at Bran and be like, tell me you didn't see something, But he's like, what are you doing out here? And Bran very cleverly, because again, Bran is a living computer, can just see everything now. It immediately pivots and is like, yeah, we need to tell Jon now. Why he picks that moment?
Well,
to
I
be
think
like, it's convenient, but
the fact is, like, he was just told about his family, and he comes out. He's in this like headspace.
Right. He's
like,
in this very emotional headspace.
Very well. Listen, I don't want to say that Sam's this type of character, but he might climb the highest tower and jump off.
True.
Like he's not in the right headspace. And when he comes out and Bran's there and says, "Listen, now's the time to tell Jon." And it's putting pressure on Sam to kind of refocus his mind and attention away from this horrific, tragic thing that happened to his family, and focus on his brother, in arms, Jon Snow.
Right.
And you have a chosen family, not the family you were born to, but the family that, you reluctantly chose, once you got to the Night's Watch. And that's really where your attention needs to be. And you need to do the ultimate right thing by Jon by telling him. And so I think Bran is sort of making sure that Sam cements his friendship with Jon at this pivotal point and go ahead and tell him the truth. And really, tell him like, this is more important than, the unfortunate downfall of your father and your brother. And it really helps, I think, Sam to get out of that headspace and really focus on the issues ahead.
Absolutely. And the other thing, too, that it establishes is that it is, again, the beginning of kind of Daenerys' downturn, which is where, again, Benioff and Weiss had been clearly trying to build off this idea that George R. R. Martin, I think, did a much better job of cementing in the books of where Daenerys was always going to kind of have this heel turn, give in to her Targaryen nature, and so much of the last season was all about her almost attempting to fight against her inner nature, despite it, again, her kind of not being able to help itself. Again, there was a big implication, especially surrounding the Tarly's death, where it's like, even though she felt that was the right just thing to do, there was a big implication and worry from Tyrion and Varys that she may have been acting a little bit too headstrong. And there's a reason why they bring that scene up as far as being the thing that begins kind of the destabilization, because there's a reason why when Sam tells Jon and reveals it to him, he immediately asks him, when he tells Jon about Daenerys murdering his father and brother, he's like, would you have done that? Again, it's supposed to begin this idea of people starting to lose faith in Daenerys when she didn't really have that much faith to begin with, and starting to refocus things on Jon, who, while being the reluctant hero, has seemingly, again, always strived to do the right thing as best he could.
Well, it's you gave up your crown with she,
Right.
And, I think it's one of those things where, again, that energy, right, that he had from just being told about his family, that is the right moment to sort of channel that, because it gives Sam ammunition. It's like Jon, it's like Sam loves Jon,
Yes.
and the fact is Jon can easily start dismissing what he has to tell him. But Sam has to ultimately have that backbone to say, slaps Jon around and be like, no, you're going to listen to me.
Right.
And so I think that anger, that sort of frustration, that sadness, all that kind of headspace stuff is so focused by Bran. That's why he chose this moment. That's why he's sitting there, the human automaton, just like, wheeling up on his power scooter to tell him to go do this. That's what is sort of, really Bran's role in these episodes, is to kind of be at the right place at the right time. And, I think it's really effective here, and it leads to a conversation that, needs to happen. And it's not too forced, because I feel like the magic of it all really brings it together.
Yeah, exactly. And like I said, it's very deliberate how it's placed here in this sequence. And like I said, it's as far as how it's meant to set up the conflict for the season and for the next episode. And also, I think, again, it's very deliberate as well how the episode ends with Jaime, who we haven't seen the entirety of the episode, marching into Winterfell. I love how, too, it's like, again, I love how at the end of the episode, it still shows that, like, yeah, the Unsullied and the armies are still marching into Winterfell. That just shows how many of them there are.
So when Jaime gets there and gets off the horse, right, this is the
Bran
stare
sees
down
him immediately.
And Bran, right, he just mouths to Jaime, "Don't climb the walls." No, sorry.
Like
he's giving him a stare down.
He definitely is giving him a stare down, but
he's like, "Get ready for one of my clever lines."
It takes him a couple of seconds to realize, but Jaime realizes, of course, it's like the minute that he gets there, it's like, of course, the kid who I pushed off the wall is now this all-seeing, all-knowing entity. Just my luck,
Yeah, it's what he says to him next episode is great, but
Yeah.
we'll get to it when we get to it.
Right. We
like
missed
I
a
said,
couple of
Bran's
sequences.
firing in all cylinders.
Yeah, Bran is firing on all cylinders. Like I said, we missed a couple sequences. Arya has a quick reunion, obviously, with the Hound and Gendry. Arya also reuniting with Jon in the Godswood. More implications as far as them not trusting Jon to look out for the interests of Winterfell, all that stuff. But we'll cover all of that and more in next week's episode, episode 2, A Night of the Seven Kingdoms, which again continues a lot of the conflict and confrontation as far as once Jaime gets there and them kind of prepping for the incoming doomsday. We'll cover all of that in next week's episode. As like I said, we're into the final 6 as far as wrapping up exactly what it is that went wrong, wrapping up our Talkin' Thrones series that we've been doing for this last year and a half. Pat, thank you once again for joining me. Where can the good people follow you on the interwebs?
Hey, listen, man, I'm doing the Instagram thing at Patrick W. Huber, posting photos here and there whenever I kind of feel up for it. So if you want to follow me, go ahead and check out my social media there at Instagram at Patrick W. Huber, and maybe leave a like, comment, or something. I don't know.
Of course. Definitely be sure to do that. And of course, follow me on my Instagram at Movie Nerd Reviews across all platforms. Be sure to follow the official Talkin' TV podcast across all platforms. Subscribe to us on YouTube. Follow us on Twitch. New episodes of Talkin' Thrones, at least for the next 5 weeks, are released every Friday on Spotify and Apple Podcasts. And as always, people, 12 seasons in a short film, and watch more fucking movies. We'll see you guys next time.